Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, for episode 6 of the podcast. So, for this episode today, we're going to talk about something a little bit different. It's not really newsworthy, but it is something that I saw on social media, because that is something I'm planning on doing. I haven't done it in the few episodes that I've done so far of this podcast, but something I will plan on doing every once in a while. Not every episode, but on a reoccurring basis, I would say, is prominent things that occur on social media. Messages that get spread, maybe pictures, stuff like that. Maybe fights that occur on Twitter and stuff like that, because, it's fun. I live for that stuff. But, yeah, so that's basically what's going to happen today. Before we get into it, remember to like this video and subscribe. No matter where you're watching it, whether it be YouTube or Rumble or wherever, make sure to hit that subscribe button. That would really help me out. I would really appreciate that. Thank you so much for doing that. So yeah, please hit the subscribe button. So yeah, all right, let's get into it. So obviously, this war in Iran, along with the war in Gaza, has really changed the conversation a lot about America's relationship with Israel. And because of that, a lot of people who previously hadn't been doing that have been, a lot of people have been fighting on social media over, Israel's conduct in the war, Israel's influence in America, whether or not to conflate the Israeli government and their policies with your view towards Jewish people, I guess. A lot of that, it gets wrapped up in that a lot. And so, excuse me. So, obviously, that's a big conversation that's been happening. So, last week, because today is Tuesday, it's currently Tuesday night that I'm recording this. Last week on Thursday, I think it was, last week on Thursday, it was the 26th, so it was Thursday, Joe Rogan had Dave Smith on his podcast, and, the two of them are good friends. Yeah, Joe and Dave have known each other for years, and they get along great. And they started talking, I guess, about this Iran war. And Dave started making certain claims that, of course, gets him into trouble with the pro-Israel crowd, where, they call him, they call him anti-Semitic, they call him, a Jew hater, all that stuff. And then, of course, when you point out to people that he himself is Jewish, they immediately change the tune, and they go, oh, well, he's a self-hating Jew. That's really the problem. And so, of course, he gets attacked over his criticism of Israel all the time. Well, anyways, he ended up getting into a bit of beef on Twitter with Gad Saad. So, for those who don't know, Gad Saad is a, I don't know if he's what you would call a evolutionary psychologist or marketing professor, I think is his title or something like that. But he's a little bit into philosophy and a little bit into psychology and stuff like that. That's really where he seems to have. People seem to know him for that and all that stuff. And he put out a bunch of tweets right after Dave appeared on Joe's podcast about, how much he doesn't like Dave, and also, I guess, how much he thinks Dave blames everything on Israel. Basically, a lot of it was, factually incorrect, but yeah, so here's the thing. So I have a bunch of his tweets pulled up right here that I'm going to read out loud, and I think I might post them tomorrow in case you want to actually look at them. I have all of them, by the way, so, I might make another bonus video tomorrow posting about, the actual tweets, but for now I'm just going to read them off. So some of these don't have anything directly to do with Dave, but a lot of them kind of do. But anyway, so Gad Saad, marketing professor, psychologist, whatever, philosopher, whatever. That's his profession or his niche, I guess. Now, in terms of like who he is actually, Gad Saad is a he's kind of complicated. He's a cultural, secular, atheist, Jewish guy from Lebanon who moved to Canada. Yeah, so that's kind of a mouthful, but that's basically who he is. And obviously, he's somewhat pro-Israel. I wouldn't say he's overtly pro-Israel, but he's staunchly anti-Islam. And so because of that, it kind of puts him in the pro-Israel camp. And he, obviously, his critiques, his criticism of Islam leaves him defending Israel a lot. Not that he wouldn't do it anyways, but that's just, again, that's kind of the box that he's in. And that he's kind of been put into or put himself into over the last couple of years. Excuse me. Sorry. So he put up a series of tweets, and I just want to go through them to give some insight into how warped his thinking is, and also how much he seems to be losing it, like a lot of people in the pro-Israel camp. Seems to be just losing it, mentally, emotionally speaking. It really is kind of a weird... It really is a weird sight to behold. It really is bizarre. So he puts a tweet out. I think it was actually just, this one I think was yesterday. But so this is his tweet. He says, quote, Hamas agency, nearly, in quotes, I guess you could say, nearly 13 million kids have been killed by the Zionist regime over the past 3 days. And then in parentheses, TikTok bros regurgitate this figure on all podcasts. Authenticated sources from Iran, between 30 to 40,000 protesters have been killed by the Iranian regime in a few days. TikTok bros, like, that's just your opinion, man. Where are the bodies? Yeah, okay, so first of all, I think that's incorrect. And this is also one of the things that Dave got in trouble for when he was on Joe's podcast, is he believes, and I think rightfully so, that the death toll from the Iranian protests that occurred from late December until like end of January, beginning of February, throughout the entire month of January, I really haven't seen any evidence to suggest that it was 30 to 40,000 casualties, like a lot of people want to say. A lot of people take it and run with it. They say it's 30 to 40,000. I really don't think that's it. I mean, certainly people died, for sure. There were certainly people died, but I don't think it was 30 to 40,000. In fact, I think the more accurate numbers that I've seen are, I think, roughly average of about 6,000 to 8,000 people were killed. Maybe 10,000 tops. Yeah, maybe 10,000 max. So certainly people died, and that's horrible. That's a tragedy. Nobody's doubting that. But, again, I've not seen any actual evidence to suggest that it was at least 30,000. Some people say as high as 50,000. You really got to show me. You really got to show me the proof for that. I really haven't seen much. But anyways, so that's the tweet he puts out. He says about Hamas agency and authenticated source from Iran. So then some guy named Indigenous Judean responds, and I think he said this sarcastically, obviously, but he said, Gad, aren't you aware? Muslims are simply incapable of killing fellow human beings. It's absolutely against their religion. Every case of a Muslim ever killing someone else is a false flag, which, it's like, come on. And then he quote tweets this guy, and I'm pretty sure he agrees with him. And this is the part that made me laugh. This made me laugh so hard. He says, precisely, whenever a Muslim kills anyone, it was a Jew pretending to be a Muslim. Whenever a Muslim does not kill someone, this is indicative of Islam because the noble faith is peaceful. So, do you hear how ridiculous that sounds? So, two things wrong with that. First of all, that's obvious. That's obviously a straw man. Like, no, even the people who are critical of Jews specifically, I've never heard that argument made, that if a Muslim kills someone, it was a Jew in disguise pretending to be a Muslim. Like, where do they come off with that? I mean, seriously, it's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. But so that's yeah. First of all, that's obviously a straw man. That's the first thing. It's a total straw man. But then also, more importantly, it's just also like, first of all, it's not only is it a straw man, but also it's like a sign that he's just like coping. Like, that's what it is. The whole thing is both, in addition to a straw man, the whole thing's a cope. That's what it is. You know, they're coping with the fact that, you know, people are, I guess you could say, recognizing patterns, or basically just recognizing the corruption and the brutality of Israel against its neighbors and stuff like that. And so now he's basically just coping by resorting to these straw man arguments about how, oh, well, if you stubbed your toe on your desk, it's, you know, then you would blame Israel for that. Or, you know, you would blame the Jews for that. And nobody is ever making those arguments, obviously. That's what you got to get through. Nobody is making those arguments. And it just really isn't. It just made me laugh so hard at how ridiculous it was. And so that's the first thing. But then also, then he also starts going on rants more. And this all occurred, by the way, all these tweets that I'm going to read have occurred between Thursday and today. So within the last 5 days. So with regards to Dave Smith personally, so this was at 5:32 p.m. on last Thursday. Excuse me, my goodness. So, sorry, I just ate. That's why I'm burping so much. But anyways, he puts out a tweet at about 5:30 in the evening, and this is in response to Dave Smith being on the Joe Rogan podcast. And I actually watched the entire podcast. I watched like the entire 3 hours, and there was a point, I think, I don't remember exactly what he said, but there was a point in the episode where Dave specifically brought up Gad, and he specifically mentioned Gad, Saad, and of course, Gad felt the need to respond to that. So he put out a tweet, and here's what he said. He said, quote, "Dear at Comic Dave Smith," which is Dave Smith's Twitter username. He said, basically, "Dear at Comic Dave Smith, I'll engage with you here because you were apparently very upset on your most recent appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast. I don't engage with your positions because in a world of fixed resources, one does not have the time to engage with everyone in possession of an opinion. You've managed to catapult yourself onto the conversation. More power to you. Quantum physicists should not bother with my opinion on the topic since I've readily admit that I'm hardly an expert in that field. I dare venture that my knowledge of quantum physics, very little, is orders of magnitude higher than your knowledge, air quotes, of Israel and the Middle East. I have epistemological humility. You possess none. Cheers." So something that I'm just taking away from that now, actually, is that Gad Saad is making literally the same argument that Douglas Murray tried to make to Dave Smith when they were on Joe Rogan's show last year, which is that you're not allowed to have an opinion, or you're not allowed to publicly voice your opinion about a topic if you're not a quote-unquote expert on the topic. And, you know, it really does bother me that people like Gad Saad and people like Douglas Murray have developed this sort of elitist attitude towards people who are critical of Israel or just critical of American foreign policy. It really goes to show how much they're losing control of the conversation and how much they're resorting to what was for years seen as, by the way, as leftist talking points. You know what I mean? Like, the left tried to smear every right-winger in the country over how they viewed or how they handled COVID, you know? The idea of, oh, you're not allowed to have an opinion on COVID or on the COVID vaccine because, you know, you're not a biologist, you're not a virologist, you're not an expert in the field, in that, you know, you haven't studied it. Well, the experts clearly were wrong, you know, not to make this about COVID or anything, but, you know, wearing masks obviously wasn't as effective. The vaccine was not as effective as people thought it was, especially for young people. And so, yeah, to have this sort of snobby elitist attitude really does just remind people of what we just went through like 4 or 5, even now up to 6 years ago with regards to COVID and also woke ideology and stuff like that, which, by the way, Gad has been very critical of. He's been very critical of woke ideology. That's part of his criticism, is not just the victimhood mentality, but also the idea that you're not allowed to push back on criticizing that victim mentality because you're not an expert in any way, shape, or form. And so it really did come off as just, again, elitism, an elitist mentality, and also it really just came off as pure cope for him to say that. So, yeah, that's pretty much what Gad said. And then Dave responded to it, and by the way, he fashionably ratioed him on this post. He said, quote, excuse me, he said, "Come on, Gad, this is just too stupid. What you're demonstrating is not humility, it's elitism and cowardice. I'm not very upset. I'm quite happy for you to essentially give me a victory by default. Either engage in the argument or stop talking shit. That's what a man with integrity would do. This is just weak." And yeah, for sure. And, you know, I don't use the term cowardice, although I do sometimes, but definitely it is elitist. It is elitist, and you could say it is cowardice to just hide behind a computer screen or behind the screen of your smartphone and tweet at the person all day about how terrible they are without actually like engaging with them directly, your ideas, like maybe in person to their face, whatever. Which, you know, if they wanted to do a debate of some kind on Joe's show, because Joe has had both Gad and Dave on his show, Joe, I think, would be more than happy to do it because he'll have anybody on his podcast, anybody that he knows, anybody who's been interested, all that stuff. And so, yeah, I really do think it was a straw man, and it was just cope for Gad to say this. And, you know, he put out a bunch of other posts that really just made me laugh, but also made me cringe because of how ridiculous it was. So, for example, here's another post. This is from March 28th, so this would have been Saturday. So it's a post. It says, quote, "Breaking, thousands of Muslim jihadis are on their way to the Christian town of Saquelabia in Syria following yesterday's pogrom." And then Gad quote tweeted it and said, "I truly hope that Wikipedia Dave is able to link the looming massacre to Israel. The world needs to know the true story here." So obviously he was being sarcastic when he said that, but of course, also that's the other knock on Dave Smith for some reason. I don't really know where it came from. The idea that he gets all of his knowledge, his foreign policy knowledge, from Wikipedia articles, which is not true at all, because Dave knows plenty of people in the anti-war community who get their foreign policy news, their knowledge from actual reputable sources. And I've never once seen any of them cite a Wikipedia article for their knowledge. And so this is just obviously a straw man and also just outright incorrect. And so, yeah. And then now, as far as Christians getting massacred in Syria, listen, I don't know if it's the Syrian government that's doing that, but this, of course, is the next point, which here's another. Well, actually, here's another tweet. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, here we go. From IDI, a tweet that said, "Syria's Christians are being erased, churches seized, crosses torn down, communities intimidated into silence or exile." Gad then quote tweeted it and said, "I hope there is a way to blame the Jews for this." And then Dave DeCamp, who is who's an editor at antiwar.com, great guy, by the way. I think he's a great guy. Dave DeCamp responds in the comment section. He says, "I have some good news for you." And then it's the headline from a news article from the Times of Israel. So this is Israeli media, by the way, not Qatari media, not Al Jazeera or whatever. This is from Qatar. This is from Israeli media, the Times of Israel. It says, quote, "Netanyahu claims credit for starting historic process that led to the fall of the Assad regime." So, you know, referencing the collapse of the regime of Bashar al-Assad in December of 2024. And immediately, and this article's from like the day after he fled the country. And so, and by the way, Dave DeCamp ratioed Gad Saad on that tweet. yeah, he not only ratioed him, but yeah, totally called him out on that. And by the way, I can expand a little bit if you want. So here's the actual article from the Times of Israel. So this is from December of 2024. So, oh, okay, actually, I can't pull it up. Never mind. But if you look it up, if you Google it, like, you'll find that article. It's still on. It is literally still on the Times of Israel website. So, basically, there was that, and then there was a bunch of other things that he tweeted. You know, here's another post. It says, while the world debates consent and empowerment, a Yazidi girl revealed to CNN how ISIS fighters justified raping her. Quote, this will make you Muslim. And then Gad, quote, tweeted that, and he says, yes, but ISIS is really Israel. So Wikipedia Dave confirmed that Israel is to blame, which I'm laughing. I'm laughing just reading this. Like, I'm sorry, anyone who does some actual research on the war in Syria and how the Assad regime collapsed would know that the Israelis did play a role in that. Like, they definitely did play a role in that. And I'm not going to get too deep into that on this episode because that would take a while to explain. But I just find it funny how literally how that's his argument. And how, first of all, he tries to be humorous by being sarcastic. But the whole thing comes off as cope. That's what it is. And then here's another tweet. United Nations report states that Hamas committed sexual violence, including rape, gang rape, and sexualized torture of women during the terror attacks on October 7th, 2023 in Israel. Gad quote tweeted that and said, this proves how evil Israel is because Wikipedia Dave explained to us that Hamas was created by Israel. No. First of all, again, a straw man. I don't think Hamas was created by Israel. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, if I'm correct. But yes, Benjamin Netanyahu actually did bolster Hamas. He actually, through the Qataris, sent them briefcases full of cash. You can look that up. That's another fact. But again, total straw man, total cope. That's what he's doing here. And here's another one from comedian comic Dave Smith went on the Joe Rogan podcast, episode 2474, where he either lied or spread misinformation about the conflict in Iran. Here's a breakdown with facts and evidence. And then, of course, he does a fake fact check in his Twitter thread. But Gad quote tweeted that and said, this is an outrage. Professor Dr. Wikipedia Dave has spent nearly 25 minutes scrolling through TikTok videos to inform his well-reasoned position on Iran. He will crush you, cook you, own you. You are too cowardly to debate him. He will destroy you. Again, aside from the sarcastic humor, this whole thing is just cope. What Gad Saad is doing is literally cope. Because people are more convinced of Dave Smith's arguments. The whole thing's literally cope. The whole thing is a straw man. And it really is ridiculous. It really is. It is ridiculous. In a laughable sense. It's pretty ridiculous. But yeah. And so, yeah. He calls him, and yeah, again, he calls him Wikipedia Dave. Again, I've never seen Dave Smith cite a Wikipedia article for his sources. I really just haven't. And then, okay, here's the cherry on top. So this is a big post. This is also, by the way, from Saturday. Let me pull this up. So, yeah, this is from Saturday. He says, how a Jew hater's mind works. 1. 3 Mohammeds raped your British daughter, but in reality, it was Jews who controlled the immigration policy of Britain, so really the gang rape was the fault of the Jews. The 3 rapists have no personal agency. 2. Current Syrian Muslim militia are massacring countless communities in the country, but some Israeli policy helped bring down Assad, so the real killers are Israel. The Sunni killers have no personal agency. 3. Israel and the U.S. have joint interest in ridding the world of the Iranian regime, as do many other rational actors, including Islamic states. But the U.S. has no personal agency, so they are fighting Israel's war. Okay, first of all, there is some truth, even though it was sarcastic, there is some truth to what he's saying there about Israel's role in all three of those, or even, I guess, Jewish elites, whatever. Even still, though, nobody's denying that the Muslims who commit those acts, either those terrorist attacks or those wars or whatever, nobody's denying that Muslims have personal agency and that they don't bear any responsibility for those things. Of course they do. That's literally the whole reason why Western Europe is desperate for stricter immigration policies and the deportation of Muslims from Europe. That's literally why. So, because of course they have personal agency. Nobody's saying that they don't. The argument that they're making, though, is that you can't simply blame everything, specifically what's happening in Syria. I guess you could say you can't blame all of it on the Islamists. I mean, certainly the Islamists played a role in that, and nobody's, denying that they have any agency. Nobody's denying that they don't share responsibility or blame for what's happening. What they're simply saying is that the Israelis had an interest in bringing down the Assad regime, specifically to, as they said, quote, break the Shiite crescent that stretched all the way from Lebanon to Iran, and they should be held accountable for that. But nobody's saying that these Islamists, shouldn't be condemned or punished or blamed in any way. Nobody's saying that. It's obviously a straw man. And again, just laughably speaking, this whole thing is a cope. The whole thing's a cope. And so, I don't know. That really was just something that I kind of wanted to talk about and just kind of explain how these people who are pro-Israel, or at least in some ways anti-Islam, how they're staunchly, how their minds work and what kind of conclusions or straw man arguments that they're willing to jump to in order to justify their own positions. And so, there's worse people who've made worse comments than Saad, but that one really just, again, not only put me off, but also made me laugh, because I thought, this is so ridiculous, what he's saying. This is literally so ridiculous, these arguments that he's making. And so, that's just kind of something I wanted to touch on, is that this whole thing is a cope. Whole thing's a cope. Whole thing's a straw man. But I don't relish in that too much because, in many ways, they're losing the argument. They're losing control of the narrative. And to a certain extent, that's kind of a white pill. So I guess there's that. But yeah, that's just what I wanted to talk about today. So yeah. But yeah, so I think I'll leave it there. But anyways, yeah, so smash the like button on YouTube and on Rumble and elsewhere. And please hit the subscribe button. That would really help me out. I would love for you guys to hit the subscribe button. It would really help me out a lot. I would love to see it. And, because the more people I know that are subscribed to my channel, the more people I know that are watching. And the more people that I know that are watching, the more that I will make these videos, the more that I will make this content. And also, the harder I might try to actually, improve it or advance it later on. So, yeah, I would really appreciate, hitting the like button and hitting the subscribe button. And so, yeah, I think I'll be doing another episode tomorrow. So, yeah, I guess you could say part 2 of this, cope, this stuff between Saad and Dave Smith. I will, I'll post the screenshots of his tweets, of his posts on X, tomorrow, actually. And yeah, so that's pretty much what's going to happen. So, but yeah, if you guys have been hanging out and listening this long, then thank you very much for listening to this whole thing. It's been great. This will be on YouTube and Rumble almost immediately. Again, like, subscribe, follow me on X, And yeah, I will see you in the next episode tomorrow. Thank you all for hanging out.